Hello everyone. Week 5 is upon us. We are continuing with our topic of self and extend that topic now to identity. We talked a lot about self-esteem and self-affirmation, the need for self-integrity last week, and we want to continue that and kind of look at how we can utilize this special status that the self and identity has in our psychology in order to help people change their minds. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I want to give you a feel for the topic, some of the concepts, some of the terms we're using, but also a little idea of how we can use it how we can use the self and the identity in particular to help people change their behavior. Okay, so imagine I would ask you to complete the sentence, I am 20 times. What would you say? This is a technique that a lot of social psychologists use to better understand how people define themselves and what type of identities people name. And if you ask people, they might answer something along those lines. They might use their hair color, their gender, their frame of mind. They might say something like where they earned a degree, what sports teams they support, their race, their health status, their role in their family, which country they're from, or a musical instrument they play. So there's many different answers people give when we ask them about their identity. But the key bit here is that, for instance, if somebody uses a personal trait to describe their personality or their identity, so for instance, they might describe themselves as smart or compassionate or as funny, then this is not just something, a word, but it comes almost like with an embodied state. So where people think about, okay, I am a smart person, I'm a funny person, this comes with paying attention to certain things, behaving in different situations in a certain way, and talking and maybe even dressing in a certain way. It comes with a whole set of behaviors that define ourselves. So we are interested in identities as aspects of our self-concept because they entail so many behavior descriptions that powerfully guide our thinking, our feeling, and our behavior. So imagine, for instance, that you take me. Let's say you would ask me, who are you? Name the 5-6 most important aspects of your life. I might have say something like, okay, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an athlete, I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher. And so these would be kind of 5 key roles. And if you kind of see me going through my day, then you can see that I kind of put and take off these identities just as somebody else would put and take off certain types of clothes. So for instance, when I wake up in the morning, me and my wife, we like to make coffee and drink coffee together, and then I'm the husband. And that means that I pay attention to certain things. I have a different way of talking than, for instance, when I talk to my wife, I talk differently than when I talk over slides. I might then go out with my dog and run 6, 7, or 10 kilometers. So then I'm feeling like an athlete. I behave and think about different things. It really shapes what's on my mind and what kind of goals and feelings are effectuated. And then I come back, and then I'm a father. My children are up. I'm helping to get them ready for school. I might really try to be compassionate and funny and loving to give them a good start into the day, but also be a little bit pushy to get them out of the house. And then I might be a researcher for a while, writing something. And then I might be a teacher. And in between, I might be one of these 2 things or 3 things because I get a call, an email that activates a different identity. But as you easily can imagine, that with each of these roles that I put on, it's not just me saying, no, I'm a father, or no, I'm a teacher. No, a different type of thinking, of focus, of comes with these identities. So they really, in a very profound way, shape the way I see and perceive the world, what I think about, and the way I behave. And this is the power of identities. So here are some examples, kind of like I want to give you some anecdotal examples to kind of help you maybe understand that. This is I last week listened to this really interesting talk by Claire Gerada, and she talks about basically why doctors are such terrible patients. And she says like, okay, why is it that they don't seek help, that they often do not follow their own rules and so forth? And she said it's the doctor's identities that basically discourage them from seeking help, and she's particularly interested in why they don't seek help for their mental illness. A doctor is something you are, not something that you do. I can no more take the doctor out of myself than an artist can cast off their creativity. The two are inextricably linked. Part of this identity, molded during medical school and beyond, dictates that it is the patient who become unwell, and we doctors wear magic white coats which protect us. Clearly, this cannot be true, but does explain why, as a group, doctors find it so hard to adopt the patient role. Right? Here you can see there's maybe the profound impact a role or an identity has, a professional identity, on whether I seek, for instance, help for my depression or anxiety. Right? A really crucial aspect of my life, but I might not do it because I feel like I'm the doctor. How can I treat my patients when I'm myself a patient? And so that might block me off. You can also think like in maybe a little bit more mundane or a little bit more current events, right? You might think like, oh, there's some people who wear masks and some people who do not wear masks. How come? So if you look at kind of like in each country, who are the people who are demonstrating against masks and who are the people who are wearing masks, then you can easily see that often that is quite aligned with their political identity, right? People on the right feel more strongly that we might not have to wear masks, that this is somehow an infringement on our personal rights, where people on the left or liberals feel more strongly that we should wear masks. So it seems like that here we try, that identities often give us a powerful answer to kind of figuring out what we should do. There's a complex situation, there might be conflicting information. I look to what people who share my identity do, and that helps me to figure out what I should do. So people use their self-concept and identities in service of making sense of the world and their choices within the world, right? They're trying to say, oh, does it make sense to wear a mask or not? Should I do it or not? And my identity guides me here. Our identities orient and focus attention to some features of the context and render other features of the immediate context irrelevant or meaningless, right? Depending on the identity that's activated, depending on how I fill out this identity, I will look at very different things that will behave in very different ways. But it's like, okay, so we had a lot of bad examples, but also it's not all negative, right? And I think today, in contrast, I'm thinking about this as something as tribalism, right? Where we're born to kind of have put on certain identities and then fight over them. No, personal identities are also powerful motivators of loving, caring, compassion, etc. As you can see here by these two, a father and a son, probably that share a wonderful moment together. So this is a picture here of, and this is a little bit how I think about identity in the self. This is a picture of Iron Man. I don't know if you know anything about Iron Man. I know a little bit about Iron Man, and Iron Man has kind of like, I think it's some kind of nuclear reactor as a heart, okay? It's like an extremely powerful energy center that drives him. And this is a metaphor I would like to use to kind of think about how self and identity is. If you connect something to this powerful core, if you connect a behavior, a certain realm of achievement, a certain type of a relationship with yourself, with your identity, then this is strongly infused with energy, and it gains a special status. And this is just why we are so interested in trying to figure out how we can utilize this energy core, how we can utilize the special status of the self and identity in order to change people's behaviors. Okay. So this was a little bit more an anecdotal introduction, okay? Now I want to give you some empirical evidence that kind of is trying to convince you that actually identity is a powerful mechanism in order to change people's behaviors. Let me go a little bit, kind of remind you of last year, a little bit introduction to social psychology. I think in a third or fourth week we talk about the self, we talk about self-concept, and we talk about identity. And I don't want to keep it too abstract here in this introduction, but I think it's kind of interesting to think a little bit about how these concepts are related, right? So the self we often think about is this capacity of me, the I that reflects on me. So the me is something that is in our memory, or might be something that we think of often as stable, and I can reflect on that. Right, so that would be basically, the me would be the self. It can have past, present, and future. It can temporal aspects. I can think about my past self, and I can be proud or ashamed or neutral about it. I can be think about my future self, and this can evoke fear or hope, and I can think about my current self. Right, so there are certain aspects that our self has, and the self concept contains basically these certain identities. Okay, here it says like the me aspect of the self is often assumed to exist in memory. In the last bit of this week, we will talk a little bit about that. That is actually not true. That what happens often is that our self, or our me, is powerfully shaped and constantly evolving in different contexts. This is not something that you are the person, the me, that you are the same on Monday, Tuesday, Friday in different contexts. So no, it's like a dynamic process. But this is how we think about it, right? And within the self concept are these nested kind of identities, okay? And we can think about personal identities as traits and characteristics. We talked a little about it in the beginning already. I am smart, I'm intelligent, I'm funny, I'm compassionate. No, compassionate is a social identity. Sorry, I should not have said that, because it connects us to others, right? Friendly or compassionate. So this is something where we take on social relationships. This could be types of attributes that we have. It could be roles, or it could be group membership, right? It could be a friendly mother that is American. Okay, so that would entail all three of these. And again, what we think about of the self or an identity is something that is embodied. It's not just something that's like, oh, smart means I'm good at tests. No, it is an identity, or what makes smart an identity is that it's not just like something that is a memory or kind of a list of attributes, but it shapes how you act, how you attend certain things to, and so forth, how you move, and etc. It is basically an embodied concept. Okay, it is something that we fill with a lot of meaning, and that we dynamically shape over time. Okay, so now what I want you to consider in the first part is that, just as I used this kind of Iron Man example, right? I said like, okay, can we connect something to the core and thereby infuse it with a strong energy? I want to give you some examples for why we believe in social psychology in particular, and psychology in general, that this is true. This is a kind of like fun example I want to start with, but even so, this is like where they ask, I think 5 to 7-year-olds, they ask them, okay, they describe one person as a carrot eater, and they describe another person as eating a lot of carrots, or constantly eating carrots, or something like that. So it indicates that this person has a high frequency of eating carrots. But what kids assume is that a carrot eater, a person that has as an identity to eat carrots, and they have obviously other examples in this research, is much more likely to eat carrots in the future, to eat them more often, and to kind of sustain his carrot eating habits. Whereas a person that is described as eating very often carrots is suspected to be less consistent in its carrot eating. And the reason why I'm telling you that is that from early on we think of these identities as something that impacts our behavior, right? Where we think about, okay, if I am a carrot eater, I suspect that I will eat carrots today, tomorrow, and so forth in the future, and I will ferociously keep on eating those carrots. So children from a young age suspect there's something special about identities. And we used this in last week's seminar a little bit when I talked about direct labeling as one technique that we can use that kind of capitalize on this idea, especially for children, where we directly label children as something and that changes their behavior. This works particularly well with children. I think I'll give you on the next slide an example of how to do that with older people or grown-ups, because I think for us, we would be a little bit reactant if we are directly labeled as being something. But there's a famous study by Miller, Brickman, and Boland where they, and I talked about this in a seminar last week, just to remind you here, is where they try to convince pupils in elementary school and in primary school to stop littering. And in one condition, they tell the class, this is a class of non-litterers. We are a non-littering class, okay? This is our group identity. They didn't try to persuade them in any sense. This is, for instance, in a control condition, they didn't tell them anything. In a persuasion condition, they told them all these good reasons why you should not litter in the classroom, why you should not litter in the hallway, why you should put your stuff into the garbage bin. But as you can see here, right, there's a massive difference between the attribution condition, they call it attribution here. This is why they labeled them as the non-littering group, and the control and persuasion condition. So for children, it's often a very powerful mechanism to convince them to behave in a certain way by telling them that they are what they are. So how can you do that, for instance? How could you elicit something like that for older people, right? So here we have to be a little bit more conscious that we are not evoking reactants. We talked about reactants quite a bit in the last 2 weeks, but it's important to not go in and say like, oh, you are a voter, right? For instance, if I want to motivate you to go voting, I could say like, oh, you're a voting person. No, so that might not work. But here in this research by Brian et al., what they did is they asked voters, how important is it to you to be a voter in an upcoming election? So here they asked them before they went to the election to kind of think about their voting behavior as part of their identity versus how important is it to you to vote in the upcoming election. I mean, look at how subtle this difference is. There's like the content is very much the same, but one suggests that voting is part of your voting identity and the other one suggests that it is simply a behavior. And as you can see here, oops, I wish you could see that. Okay, I'm not sure. I hope that worked. As you can see here, there's this massive difference in these two studies. So here you see on the, let me activate my pen here. You see here on the y-axis the percent of voter turnout in these two studies. And here you can see that what they call the noun condition, which is like where they ask them to think about themselves as voters, this massive increase by percentage of voter turnout, right, in these two elections, okay? By simply thinking, eliciting people to think about something as part of their identity, you can increase the chances that they act along those ways. So you can think about kind of like, okay, trying to think certain behaviors and link them to identity. You can also try to fuse their identity with a group. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is probably something like patriotism, where you have a fusion of your identity with with yourself, right? So this is a scale by Gomez and colleagues, which is called the identity fusion scale. These are 7 items, and they ask you something, for instance, about your country. I'm one with my country. I feel immersed in my country. I have a deep emotional bond with my country. And so then they ask them to kind of indicate also how likely, for instance, they would die for their country, or how likely they would sacrifice certain things for their country, etc. And what they find is like the stronger there's this fusion between the identity and the identity and sorry for that, if the self and the group, okay, there's a strong identity between me and the country, the more likely people are willing to, for instance, go to war, to sacrifice their life or sacrifice other things for their country. Here you can see on the right, this is statistics. I think in 2016 they asked people in Europe to indicate how likely they would to fight for their country. You can see the two countries, Finland and Turkey, where more than 70% say they would be willing to fight for their country. And then you see this red cluster here, Germany, Belgium, and Belgium and the Netherlands, sorry, that have the lowest score. So very few people are willing to fight for their country here. So this also shows you that you can be fused with a group to a certain degree, but that it also can mean different things. But as you can imagine, there's a very powerful mechanism. If I fuse my identity with a group, it doesn't have to be a country, it could be a country, it could be something else, impacts our behavior. There's a recent study where they look at basically how strongly university students answer these questions, similar questions as we just saw, impacts how likely they are to stay and finish their degree. So they call this when identity fusion with university, and they ask them something like, if you go back here to the scales, I'm one with my university. I feel immersed at with City University. I have a deep emotional bond with City University and so forth. And what they can find here is basically, if you first look on the right, it's like that the weakly infused show a different level of the commitment to stay on with this university than those who are strongly fused. You can see there's a massive difference in, and this is just measured, right, between those who are weakly fused, that they finish their degree, and those that are strongly fused. And it seems to be something, the idea here that the authors put forward is like, if you're committed to a group and it is fused with your identity, then you are more likely to stick to it independent of the costs or any other considerations. You can also see that here this is basically a process that works independent of your GPA or how well you're doing. So even if you're doing badly, these that are fused with their identity, they have the university fused with their identity, are willing to stay on. So it seems like something, and this is what the authors here in this, as you can see, came out in 2021, suggests this. If we could tap into that, if we could somehow figure out a way how we help students to fuse more with kind of beneficial identities that might help them to endure even if they want to quit. There's one last intervention that I would like to quickly talk about, and we talked a little bit about it already last week, and we also used to do it a little bit in the first seminar, in the first live session that we had together. So this is called utility value intervention, and this is the idea that if you basically spur interest in a topic, in any type of topic, if a person makes a connection between the content and the self. So you know, like every student might have been plagued by the question of, why must I learn something like this? What's the point of this? Why am I learning, for instance, something about statistic perception or qualitative methods? That's what I struggled very strongly with during university. I never really saw the point of qualitative methods and these different points of view. And that was just me struggling to make a connection with these methods and things that interested me. This intervention that I will describe to you in a second a little bit in detail was developed by a statistic teacher who was teaching statistics to psychology students. And as you might have heard, not all psychology students love statistics. And he tried to make it self-relevant. And this is how Hallman and colleagues describe his efforts. He began by encouraging students to look for examples of statistics in popular magazines or online media. He began by setting aside 3 to 5 minutes each week for students to share their examples. Students struggled at first to make connections, with the lack of confidence in their statistic skills being exacerbated by a lack of value for statistics. But by the end of the semester, students were taking up nearly half the class period talking about the statistic examples they were finding in the popular literature. Students seemed more engaged, confident, and willing to ask questions. The critical insight of this initial work was that students need to make their own connections between what they were studying and their life. So what they find in is like this kind of started a line of research where they looked at, can we use this technique in order to help students develop interest in it, is that, oh, what we can't do is just give them examples. It has to come from them, and we have to somehow prompt this. So this is here from basically from an intervention prompt, right? And it highlights that it needs to be personal, specific, and context relevant. So here's the intervention prompt. I would like you to think about how what we have been learning about in this class is important to your life in some way. What connection can you find between one of the topics we have been studying and something that is important in your life? Write a few sentences about that connection below. And this is a science class. Often these interventions are either math or science classes. And here the student wrote, playing hockey and friction are connected because in hockey, while passing or shooting the puck, it slides on the ice, which causes friction, slowing down the puck. Friction could be important to my life because I can better understand how much force I need to get the puck to move with the friction moving against this. So this is a very personal example, right? That person cares about hockey. This is why they use it. It's very specific. It is about one idea connected to another idea, and it's somehow relevant, right? It indicates a linkage to a specific topic in the course with their everyday life. Okay. This is another prompt where you can see it. Often these are embedded as writing exercises where you first have to kind of find a question and then you have to explain how this applies to your life, right? Answering this question, how the information could be useful to you in your life, and then they kind of try to help with these examples and applications to make sure that people write about something that's specific to the context, that is relevant, and that is personal. And this is a graph that I showed you already last week in the seminar, but here it is again. What you can see with often these very short interventions, often this is like a 15-minute intervention, you can see that this sparks interest. So this is the relevance condition here. It goes from 3.5 to 4, but more importantly, this also sparks the grades of students who have very low expectations. Low expectations in this sense means they are not very good at these topics. So students who come in and say like, I don't care about any STEM, math, statistics, and you help them to build connections to the topic. These are the students that particularly benefit from these interventions. We will talk about another example of this class of intervention, a bit of a larger intervention on this week as well. But this is it for the introduction, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the live lecture on Wednesday.